right. Just a few things today. We still gotta keep going, keep working. It never ends. Actually, it will end. It will end relatively soon. Come on. I'm just trying to get one. Oh, come on. I don't want that. Where's my mouse? Okay, so just getting a couple things ready and going to make a couple announcements. I assume I am streaming. Is this working all right? It appears to be working. Okay, good. All right, so let me just set up my monitor. My camera went down. I plugged in the wrong USB cord and I was trying to figure out why my camera wasn't working. And as it turns out, it wasn't working because it was... I plugged in a cord, just a USB cord connected to nothing. So that was working fine. All right, so today's a beautiful Friday. And it looks like the sun might come out. I'm going to go look. It could, it might not. We'll see. And just a couple things real quick. First off, a quick announcement. And so Monday, 10:30, I'll do another review session. So I'll cover, there's a lot more to cover on pages 5 and 6, and I'll cover anything there. And I'll do a couple... I'm also planning on doing a sample DBQ thing. I'm going to give you another sample DBQ. But don't forget, if you want to look at DBQs, just go to the review book. And there are, I believe, 9 DBQs in there. And then there are also a lot of sample stuff on my webpage. And as soon as I'm done with here, I'm going to put another one on there. And here's the thing. Most of the DBQs are the old format where you have to use 6 documents. This next DBQ will be... The one we're doing is only, you have to use at least 4. Now, don't forget, if you have time to stick another document in there, do it. And if you have another time to show HAP, which remember is trying to show why that document has a certain bias. If you have time to do that, stick it in. Get it in there. You know, hedge your bets. You might need it. But make sure that you have enough time to do it. I'm checking here. You know, I can't see the future. So it could happen. I don't know. All I can think of is Wizard of Oz now. But make sure that you look at that review list and all that. I will collect the notes again. This is just a easy credit, but we still have to keep going with history. And the review packet, I covered a lot. I'll cover more on Monday. So Monday at 10:30. Remember, I have meetings in the morning. There's just nothing I can do. In fact, I have like 3 tomorrow. They're going to start opening up the school a little bit to let teachers in, but not students. I'm not sure exactly the whole thing, but they're going to talk about that and a few other things. And we're going through very interesting times right now. There was... some shocking, I knew it'd be bad, but the economic news is horrific. So we have some guidelines in history to look at then. And also the AP test is a week from today. It's going to be at noon. I'll give you more information, but remember, I've posted a lot of information. Make sure that you have checked in. I made an assignment just so you didn't forget to do it. I would hate if you had to take the AP exam and you weren't able to log in. What a horrible waste of money that would be. And please also read that packet I gave you. If there's any kind of unforeseen technical errors, they have information on there about what to do. And I'll give you more, I'll remind you more tomorrow, but you're on your own in a way. You have to do it on your own. And so the more you do now, the better prepared you'll be on Friday. If Friday 11:30 you decide, boy, I should see how this thing works, not only might you miss it, but you're going to be significantly more stressed. The more stressed out you are, the worse you will do. That's part of the reason why I really wanted to have this review packet done and ready. Have that in front of you. That will dramatically alleviate your stress. If you know no matter what the topic, the question is, no matter what it is, you have this information that you've done right in front of you, you've thought about it, it's there. I have no idea how they're going to word the question. I have no idea what the document's going to be. Neither do we. But all we can do is be prepared that way. And, oh, one more thing. So, as I said the last couple days and posted, if you want to get a little bit extra on your DBQ, you thought there are areas you can improve on, or some of you do need to improve on outside information. That is the big thing. If you want to get some extra credit, if you do, show me just a quick outline. You don't need a brainstorm list or anything, just a quick outline of how you're putting it out, just a few words, just showing I can see where you're going. That opening paragraph to show context in one of your body paragraphs, I will look at it. This will help you prepare, but also give you some additional points. And for some of you, it'll pad your score, why not? But for some of you, you might need the points. And like I said, I think anybody with an 80 and 90 has a chance to pass. But if you're in the 80s, I don't know. And if you're in the 70s, I think you're going to struggle. And the reason why is outside information. That is the biggest issue that people had. All right. And the thing about it is I think you knew the outside information. Either you weren't organized and didn't get it in, you forgot it. You read the documents. Oh, I got to get the documents. Well, you got to do both. All right, here we go. So let's go and get to the 1950s. Let's finish off this. Yesterday we covered a lot. Yesterday was a review session, but Wednesday we covered a lot. By the way, I'm wearing my purple shirt. I want to look good, and a Ghostbusters T-shirt underneath it because it's nothing but style here. And where are we at here? Okay, so we did the Korean War and talk about how that was an undeclared war, and the whole thing was about fear of communism after the two shocks of 1949, and how the United States got involved in a huge land war. Firing MacArthur was a huge issue with McCarthyism. That's just an incredible time. And this horrifically bloody war, and then we have an election of 52. So I think we got right to here. The Democrats, what they really pushed was their soft on communism, but that idea of the bomber gap. That somehow the Soviets had built more bombers. And this was a complete and total lie. The Republicans used people's fears of communism and fear after Joe won to convince people that, yes, the Soviets must have more bombers. They did not have more bombers. That was simply not true. But when they look at this picture, look how small that is. This plane was so big that sometimes they would put a smaller fighter plane underneath it, and they would launch it from the bomber for high-speed missions or reconnaissance missions. And they even had little tiny jets that they would put under the wings, the experimental jets. They thought was that these jets, they could launch them and they could protect them from Soviet fighters, which never really worked, but it still gives you an idea how big the Peacemaker was. This massive thing. In fact, it had bedroom quarters and a galley for a second crew, because the plane could fly about 350 miles an hour to 400 miles an hour, so cruise about 350. And think of how long you would be in the air if you're going to fly a 12,000 mile mission. So you need two crews. It's amazing how big these things were. It would not have been a very effective bomber, but it was huge. All right, so this fear of the bomber gap, that was not true. And Truman could say nothing because of national security. But then something big happened. And this we'll lump up as the Checkers speech. And the Checkers speech was this. Oops, I lost my camera. Just give me a sec. All right, the Checkers speech. Richard Nixon became famous, as I mentioned before, because of the Red Scare. And at HUAC, he led the investigation, and I'm using that in quotes, against a State Department official named Alger Hiss. That's why I just simply have Hiss down. I'm not going to go into all the details of it. Hiss was accused of being a communist spy. Now, they had virtually no evidence, but Nixon stayed on him like a bulldog, and they got him for lying to Congress, which lying to Congress, lying under oath, or like lying to an FBI agent, is illegal, technically. Well, I got to be honest with you, the funny thing was, funny as in awkward, Hiss, as it turned out, kind of might have committed espionage, but they didn't have evidence then. That's how Nixon became famous, but he was not a wealthy man. And wealthy, very conservative Republican businessmen in California. California used to be an incredibly Republican state, which your entire life, it has been a very Democratic state. That's shifted in the 1990s. They gave him money, and it was not illegal then. They just simply gave him money that they call a slush fund for expenses while he ran for Senate and then while he ran for vice president. And this slush fund, let me look at if I got it up there. Yeah, it looked bad. And Eisenhower never really liked Nixon. He always thought Nixon was this double dealer, a trickster. Remember I told you they called him Tricky Dick? And Eisenhower never trusted Nixon. And before I get to TV and image, what happened was this. During the campaign, Eisenhower wanted to remain above the fray. And so Eisenhower never really attacked the Democrats on being soft on communism. He more just played the statesman. Well, remember I said the gloves came off? It was Nixon who did the red baiting. He did the dirty work for Eisenhower. Now you would think Eisenhower would want to reward Nixon. No, in fact, Nixon did the dirty work and Eisenhower hated him for doing the dirty work, which is so ironic. I should add one more thing. Nixon's daughter would eventually marry Eisenhower's son. It's kind of a weird little quirk in history. But when the slush fund came out publicly, Eisenhower was ready to throw Nixon under the bus and get a new vice president. And this was just a month and a half before the election. But Richard Nixon went on television. His benefactors paid for a half-hour ad in this brand new media television. And in it, Nixon laid out that he was this honest, hardworking public official who was just doing the best for his country, and laid out that, sure, he got a few gifts because he had no money. In fact, one of the more famous lines was that he said his wife wore a good Republican cloth coat and not a fur coat. And then the climax of the speech was when he said, sure, a contributor, a friend, gave his daughter a dog, a little Cocker Spaniel named Checkers. Do you want me to give my daughter's dog away? And that's why it became known as the Checkers speech. And it worked. The Republican National Committee was flooded with phone calls. You must save Nixon. What a hardworking, good, honest man Richard Nixon was. And it showed the power of television to portray image. It just exploded this. Remember I talked about image going back to 1840 in the Log Cabin campaign, which might be a good thing for a DBQ, but also image in 1896 about between McKinley and Bryan, and then FDR using his voice, that soothing, honest voice. You know, image became more important than reality. Television and the screen became an image-making machine. And since we are all now surrounded with screens, you're looking at a screen right now. You have your phone, everything else was screens, screens, screens. Image now is just being bombarded and propaganda bombarded on you. And the first time this really hit, and Nixon thought, I understand television completely. I got to be honest with you though. Nixon thought he did. But Richard Nixon actually was not an attractive character on television. We'll get to that. But they kept him. One more thing. Something happened here. We lost something. All right, we lost something big here. It moved. My fault. I accidentally moved a slide. So if you, one more thing. This is the first campaign where we get television ads. And like I said, Nixon really showed the use of television. But the Eisenhower campaign was the first ad to really realize how they could sell their candidate. Just like this brand new wave of advertising was selling cigarettes or beer or Anacin aspirin. And the Eisenhower campaign went to the first real advertising genius at this time. His name was Rosser Reeves, right there. And Reeves came out of World War II on propaganda, the propaganda of World War II, and to begin to sell products. And what they decided was they would sell President Eisenhower like they sold Bic pens, or I'm going to show you a little bit of an Anacin ad. One of the most famous Anacin ads in the world with these screen guys have a hammer in the head. These ads were shockingly annoying. But Reeves understood the great detail of, where are we at here? Okay, good. Of advertising. Keep it simple and repeat it over and over again. You don't need to have any substance. Just get something to drill a hole into their head. Some of the most effective television ads, and now ads on the internets or whatever you look at, are ads about, or ads that are annoying, but you remember them. And so, Rosser Reeves, this is the great golden age of advertising, to sell products like they sold the war and now will sell presidents. And just let me make one little quick change on this. Sorry, I had to change my settings. Isn't this exciting? You get to watch this. I don't want to say I'm jealous of you, but I'm jealous of you. All right, here we go.
What causes most of today's headaches? Doctors know it's tension. And of the four leading causes most of today's headaches. What cause?
Okay, for some reason this isn't working. The fun with technology. Oh, come on. Oh, my fault. Back to this. So I did special topics. I had to change where the sound came from on my little studio program, and I didn't change it back, and I thought I did. All right, this should work.
What causes most of today's headaches? Doctors know it's tension. And of the four leading pain relievers, only Anacin has a special ingredient to relax tension. Today, 3 out of 4 doctors recommend the ingredients in Anacin for headache pain. Look, with tension headaches, pain mounts up. You feel dull.
I love the spring.
Tension puts nerves on edge. Aspirin, with its one pain reliever, has no special ingredient to relax tension. Add buffering, still nothing special for tension. Only Anacin, of the 4 leading headache remedies, has special ingredients to relieve pain fast, help overcome depression fast, relax tension fast. And Anacin is like a doctor's prescription. That is, a combination of ingredients.
Okay, so these shockingly annoying Anacin ads and the fat, but they stuck in people's heads, and now they'll sell the president. And so the plan was to increase Eisenhower's stature, to make him seem not only like a statesman, but a man of the people. And so what Reeves did is they went to Times Square, and they pulled tourists out of Times Square, and they just had to add them to ask a question. But what the big thing they did is they had them look up, like they're looking up at some greater figure. If you're looking up at somebody, that implies that that the person has increased stature. And then recorded separately, they had Eisenhower answering these questions. So first they had him looking down. So he's looking down, and so he's looking, he's the statesman, he's above. And then he'd finish it by looking at the camera. The problem was Eisenhower needed glasses. But Reed said, no, you will look weak. And Truman wore glasses, so we don't want you to wear glasses. But he couldn't see anything. So they got cue cards that were literally 12 feet high with the words nearly 8 inches high on these big, massive cue cards. So he could read it so he wouldn't squint. And let's watch this. And this was an amazing advertising campaign called Eisenhower Answers America. Please work. Here we go.
Eisenhower Answers America.
They say we've never had it so good. Yet I've had to stop buying eggs. They're so expensive.
No wonder. You actually pay 100 different taxes on just one egg.
Made up.
We must cut costs, which means we must cut taxes.
Okay, that's a meaningless answer. But you see how they're looking up, and here they're looking down.
General, how would you clean up the mess in Washington?
My answer? It's not a one-agency mess.
Cue card?
Or even a one-department mess.
He's looking at the cue card.
It's a top-to-bottom mess. And I promise we will clean it up from top to bottom.
Okay, so absolutely meaningless answers, but they made it seem statesman. They made it seem like that he was in charge of the issues. And, he's a popular guy, so he looked like this honest man. As he said, walking out of there, it's like an old, look at what this old general has come to. I mean, he was kind of embarrassed by doing it, but it worked incredibly well. But also, we have maybe the greatest political commercial ever, because it has this catchy tune. I feel bad about this, because all weekend, this is going to be in your head. It is going to be the definition of an earworm. Here we go.
I for president, I for president, I for president, I for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John
Or Dean
or Harry, let's do the big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's hep.
It's infectious.
Get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington. We got to get where
Eisenhower
we are going.
doesn't have the
Day
whole
and
thing.
night.
That's like a 5
Let Adelaide go the other way. We'll all go with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We'll take Ike to Washington.
Now is the time for all good
I
Americans
know what you're thinking. I should move on. But no! One more time!
I for president, I for president, I for president, I for president. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John
Or Dean
or Harry. Let's do the big job right.
Come on, everybody.
Get in step with the guy that's hep. Get in step with Ike.
This is my favorite part, the track.
I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat
Okay, so with that...
the drum.
Oh, quit!
Eisenhower Answers America.
They say we've never had it so
How did we get
good.
to Eisenhower
Yet
Answers
I've had to
America?
stop
What
buying
happened
eggs.
here?
They're so expensive.
All right, so we had it in stereo. All right, so Eisenhower would win an overwhelming election. He was incredibly popular. Adlai Stevenson never looked good on television. He was an eloquent speaker who was known for giving these dramatic and great speeches, and instead he came across as stiff and wooden. And oh, Aaron reminded me of something. Thank you for mentioning it. Today is the anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. And the war was still raging in the Pacific, but it is VE Day. And it is weird to think about something that the ending of that war, which still affects us every single day. And that was 85 years ago. Oh, I should add one more thing. Today, in 1970, the Beatles issued their last album, Let It Be, which would go to #1 because all their albums went to #1. But it's today, Kind of makes me sad. I'm a slight Beatles fan. But Eisenhower won this massive election. But you'll notice the South went back to Stevenson because he didn't mess with civil rights. So even though they were wary of Northern Democrats now after Truman, even though Truman was a Southern Democrat, but liberal Democrats who wanted equal rights, they went back because there was no Republican Party in the Deep South. But Eisenhower would win a massive victory. I should add, they would repeat it again. Eisenhower would beat Stevenson again with almost the exact same results in 1956. A liberal Republican, conservative Republicans are going to be furious. And part of what Eisenhower did is he said he would go to Korea, and finally the awful, brutal trench warfare would end. It would finally end. In October of 1953, or September 1953, an armistice was signed, a ceasefire, and the war ended virtually on the same trench line that was established in April of 1951. That's how horrible is it was. And by the way, August has very good acting. You see a candidate doing an ad like that? You know, no, but you see almost as ridiculous of ads as that. I mean, you think about a president or the presumptive Democratic nominee Biden just put out this internet thing of him, like a cartoon of him riding in a car with sunglasses, and President Trump's thing just came out with his campaign as like the Death Star destroying competition, which weren't they the bad guys? I don't know, but still, so maybe just different types of ridiculous. But back to this, the armistice finally happened, but there's never been a peace treaty. Technically, South Korea and North Korea are still at war. They are still at war, technically. And the United States is still technically in this conflict. The U.S. still has 28,000 troops and a tactical air wing, fighter planes and bombers still in Korea to this day. Now, South Korea is a modern, now a democratic republic with a huge army, can most certainly defend itself, but the U.S. has maintained it there because North Korea is essentially this authoritarian military state with a huge army, not relatively, or a huge army, very well trained, but pretty old equipment. But still, it's the standoff still exists there today. And to North Korea, they are still technically at war with the United States. And that's part of the reason why they have frantically built nuclear weapons, which they have, as a deterrence to the United States, and that they have an authoritarian lunatic in charge. Well, if you look at the civilian casualties and death casualties, it says 36,000 American soldiers were killed in this war. Another 10,000 died of disease and other issues. So we're talking over 46,000 Americans died in this war. And look how many Koreans died. It was a bloodbath. You know, we're talking over 2 million Koreans and over 600,000 Chinese died in this fight. So, now Turkey, they sent a whole brigade. A lot of Turks died. The war was over, but still, don't forget, the U.S. had just fought a land war with China. And I should add something about that. This is going to have great impact on the Vietnam War down the road. So let's move on to Eisenhower and his presidency. Eisenhower would call his campaign, kind of his version of the New Deal, dynamic conservatism. Dynamic conservatism. And his basic goal was to preserve the New Deal, but to not expand the New Deal. By the way, dynamic conservatism, what does that even mean? It was like, what does really the New Deal mean? The fair deal. Kennedy would have the New Frontier. Johnson would have the Great Society. Lyndon Johnson would have New Federalism. All the way to President Obama, who would have just basically change. And President Trump, Make America Great Again, which he took directly from President Reagan. Let's make America great again. I mean, that's not just a total copy of it, but still, it's just a slogan. preserve the New Deal. That's why conservative Republicans were actually furious about this. And one of the biggest examples of how a New Deal, basically liberal thinking, was the Federal Aid Highway Act, which created the interstate highway system, and that's where you get the, it's called the Eisenhower interstate system. And this was a very liberal program. And it was sold not only as a major effort to provide jobs and economic growth in the 1950s, but having this highway system would dramatically help business. This is a huge government aid. Therefore, the people of the United States helping business. Think about having this modern highway system makes it easier to get your goods to market, and also to get raw materials for production. But also as a defense project. If there's nuclear war, we have to evacuate cities. We need a modern highway system. Now, if you've been on the interstate highway system, and let me throw a city out here like Los Angeles, you're getting nowhere fast. And I was in a traffic jam on I think it was oh God, I can't remember now. Was it Highway 101? I can't remember. Good story. I'm really telling a good story here, but I was in one traffic jam where I did not move, and it was 5 lanes, and I did not move for an hour and a half. I was in a bright yellow Mustang, and that was my rental car. They just gave me this. So I stuck out like a sore thumb moving nowhere. They also expanded Social Security to farm workers, household help. Part of the issue of the Social Security was to get it passed and to appease Southern Democrats, it did not include these jobs, and the reason why is because a lot of these workers were black. And so this would expand Social Security and also made it for self-employed people to do it. So conservatives were furious about this. In fact, you're going to get a lot of Republicans calling Dwight Eisenhower a communist and a traitor. I just want you to wrap your mind around that for a second. Dwight Eisenhower, the 5-star general, the commander of D-Day, a traitor. That should give you an idea of the way politics worked and how the Cold War was affecting politics to this day. It's so casually calling your political opponents enemies of the people. Also, one of the biggies, they made health insurance, paying for health insurance deductible. They could drop their income tax, so tax deductible for employees. And the big thing about this was, that there was no national health insurance. And the realization that health insurance was incredibly expensive, and health insurance became a way to pay workers in World War II. So they just kept this system going. And so the United States has this system where it encourages, by tax law, employers to pay for health insurance for employees. And now we are completely tied to health insurance and work. And if everyone's working, I guess you could say the system, there's problems with it, but it works. At least it can function. We are coming to a catastrophe now where just in the last month, over 20 million people lost their jobs, and that's probably undercounting it. And we are coming to, this is an absolute crisis, showing the problems of having health insurance tied to work. Crisis is not strong enough of a word, and I have no idea what's going to happen. And there's my shudder. But that was his keeping basic elements of the New Deal. But with that, we have a growing economic boom, and the consumer economy was expanding faster than ever before. After World War II, there was all this pent-up demand, and pretty soon more production. And going into the 1950s, because of new industrial practices, the United States could produce more goods than what people had. And they desperately had to increase demand. They had to get people to buy more than what was seen as normal, especially after years of depression where people thought, I better hold on to my money. And then World War II, where there was just nothing to buy. Now we have to get people to buy. Now, Keynesian economics fits into that, because the whole idea of Keynesian economics is to put money into people's hands so they could buy, so production continues. The problem is, and remember, Keynesian economics is liberal economics. It's to get money into the hands of regular working people. I should add, we are definitely, completely conservative now. We have all this unemployment, and basically what we've done is pump money into the hands of the very wealthy. That's why, even though the stock market's not as high as it was in February, the stock market, in fact, this is just mind-boggling. It's a sucker's market, without a doubt. But we've had the worst economic news ever. I'm trying to wrap my mind around this today, this morning, and the stock market went up. That shows you there's a complete disconnect where the tiny group on top is doing better than ever before, and they are just still chasing profits as companies, the actual real economy is shaking. There's something you should know about the stock market. The stock market has three major connections to the economy. You want to hear the three major connections to the economy? The first connection they have to the economy, the actual real economy, is none. The second is less than none. The third is absolutely no connection. The stock market is like a big casino, and it doesn't necessarily affect the real economy. We're seeing it now. Wow. But back to this. They're producing more. It's like a different world. How do you do that? First off, this is why we already mentioned Rosser Reed's, the golden age of advertising. To sell more, or to get people to buy products they don't need or don't even know they need. And that is where you get this whole thing about pushing these new products that people would want. And that includes like the brand new thing of television, where nobody had a TV in 1948. Virtually every household in America had a television. And back then, televisions they tried to make them as part of furniture, these big wooden monstrosities. I can remember it was a big deal when I was a little kid. We didn't have much, but all of a sudden, we could afford to buy this big, huge TV with like a big counter. It looked like a coffee table, the television. And it was so big. The screen was 19 inches. I can't even, that's diagonal, 19 inches. It was so big. But also the concept that fit in with advertising, a way to get people to buy stuff they don't need is to produce stuff that breaks. And planned obsolescence is the idea of producing goods, producing products that will soon be either obsolete or will break very soon. So build products with the idea that down the road, in a very short time, they'll already be obsolete and you got to buy a new one. And that is where they came up with the new model year for a car. And it was such a big deal, especially when I was growing up. It's not near as big a deal as it used to be. But here it is for the Chrysler, the new 56, with the idea that the 1956 Chrysler is a brand new car. It's all these changes. And if you have a 55, you are way behind the curve. In fact, you're a loser if you have an old one. You need to get the new model. And most of these changes were nothing more than cosmetic changes. And so minor little changes on the style of the car, and then market it as a massive new change. And this is really selling the LeSabre. And they wanted to make it look like a jet wing. So the big thing was putting these fins. Pretty soon the fins would be 2 feet high, sticking out of the back of the car. And you can see why. Here's the fin of a LeSabre, and it's supposed to look like the jet fighter, the F-86 Sabre, the first really great jet fighter the Americans produced in the early 1950s. Just that? It rained again. Why do they hate us? So, that is where you get this idea of a disposable nation, where you could buy products with the idea that soon you need a new one. And think about the idea of this new economy, to purposely make goods that you will throw away in the year. And so this is a classic example. This is actually from the 90s, but all these televisions and computer monitors that are already obsolete. And what do? Sell. You get it, you use it until it falls apart, then you throw it away. And think of all the disposable goods we have today. There's a reason for that. and they market it as convenience or you need it, but that's not the reason. The reason is so you buy that today and tomorrow you got to buy more, and then tomorrow you got to buy more, and tomorrow you got to buy more, and therefore demand keeps up with supply because they could produce so many goods so fast in this new industrial system. And that is the new economy. Planned obsolescence. I should add, you are looking at it, if you have your phone, in fact, phone might be the greatest example of planned obsolescence. They make a phone with the idea, I don't have my phone in front of me, but just imagine I'm holding my phone. They make an idea of the phone that it will break and fall apart right away. So you have to buy a new one. That is the whole concept of planned obsolescence. So you think about how they have these things where the phones where pretty soon, the old phone operating system isn't working anymore. The batteries begin to degrade. You got to buy a new one. And people think, that's just the way life is. No, that's planned. So with that, also, another big shift in the 1950s is we call it the baby boom. And that's where you start getting this term of a generation, which are, now they talk about generations all the time, the baby boom generation, which we are still being dominated by this pretty conservative baby boom generation. And then they'll talk about Generation X. Where did they come up with these terms? I don't know. Is it Generation X? I don't. That begins about 1965. So baby boom is approximately 1945 to 1965. Then we have Gen X. And then we have, was it Gen X? I don't know. I'm already lost interest in the generations. It's arbitrary, made up stuff. But we have Gen X, and then Gen Y, then Millennials, and then Generation Z, then Generation F, and the pizza generation. I don't know. But the big thing about the baby boom generation was this. Birth rates went up dramatically after World War II. And the reason why they went up dramatically at that time was, think about years of depression. If you're unsure, if you're a family, you're unsure about tomorrow, it's probably a good idea to not have a child. By the way, that's why family planning and birth control is such an important issue for the financial and economic health of families. Especially, it is like the overwhelming issue for women. If women can't control that, they are already in an economic hole. Just have less ability to compete. It is such a major issue. We'll come back to that. But, yep, we have X, Y, Millennial, Z. Why Z? Why? Okay, but it's silly. But they talk about this all the time. But after the war then too, we have all these men going away. And you're not sure. So that is why all of a sudden after the war and during this affluence of the war, there was this big boom to have as many children as possible. Why? Life is better. We can afford children. And it was an idea to go back to normalcy. Let's go back to the way things used to be when we could have children and the nuclear family. And it was such a desire to go back to get married and have normal child. During the Depression, people held off getting married. After World War II, people got married significantly younger. It went from the average age of getting married was the late 20s, early 30s, much like today, to teenagers getting married. And because it was like, let's go back to the way things were. Well, that's not the way things were. But it was the idea that we should go back to that. That's why people always think in previous times, boy, they used to get married so young. Not really. That was an idea, that was just a wrong interpretation of history during the baby boom era. So you're going to have this huge demographic shift of all these people being born. And they would come to dominate society from this whole time. The first youth society, and then they would be young adults here, and in the 80s getting older. And today, it's the baby boom generation, people who are baby boomers, who control government. It's actually pretty amazing where we have, the president's a baby boomer. The main Democratic nominee is actually not a baby boomer, but he's older than that. But this generation dominates politics. And they grew up in unprecedented affluence. And they still live in the world that everybody has a chance to move up and do better than their parents. That is why there is such a divide between older people born in this generation, who they saw it as the future is always bright, and people born 1990 on, where generations today, it looks like they will not do as well as their parents. And so that is why there's such a big shift. Oh, I should add one more thing about child rearing. And so the thought was that being with your parents would spread disease. And so the first thing they did when you would have a baby, if you could have a baby in a hospital, they would take the baby away and put him in this sanitized incubation center because they didn't want contact, which was totally different than what they think today. So the big thing that was happening, though, were that people were living longer. And I can't emphasize that enough. And it's sometimes referred to as the troika or the triple example of life expectancy. People lived long. Okay, I made a mistake here. Life expectancy went up, not because people were necessarily living longer as adults. More people than ever before were living past the age 1. And that's why life expectancy went from being in the late, people living to about, the average, the life expectancy was about 58, to all of a sudden, it went to the 70s by the 1960s. When people got past 1, they were living well into the 70s. It's not a lot different today than it was in the 1950s. But what it was is more people were living past age of 1. Infant mortality rates dropped like a rock. And it was these big reasons. Number 1, access to clean water. 2, wide-scale vaccinations. The biggest one was Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. And I've mentioned Salk before, but when I talked about Roosevelt, but the polio vaccine, which came about in the late 1950s, there's my great picture of clean water. I remember getting the shot, but this it changed everything. I should add that Salk could have patented this and made billions, but he said that this is too important for the public, and he would not take patent, would not patent this, would not allow it to be patented, made it public use, and so everybody could take advantage of that. That is just amazing today. Trust me. I could see a vaccination coming out of the coronavirus with huge government aid and them making billions off it. Because why not? You know, this is gouge people when they're ill. And pasteurized milk. Pasteurization saves so many people because you could get milk that these 3 things changed the world. Public health, but also antibiotics, which came about in the late 1930s, but really started to be used in World War II. Antibiotics would be revolutionary. And by the 1950s, this solved so many issues. I should add, why I put dots after that was because, but now there's some more resistant antibiotics. And I should add one more thing too, that almost all antibiotics are made in China, because the United States decided not to produce anything, and that could be a problem down the road too. But that's why people were living longer. But this also is the time of the return of the cult of domesticity. And of domesticity, I mean, we've talked about this before, but this idea of the role of women in American society was to be homemaker. We've talked about this before. To make a clean house, to care of their children, and to be a good wife. In fact, the only way women could be successful was to get married. That was the cult of domesticity. And that was created with the Industrial Revolution. And there was almost a frantic grasping of this old, partially made up role of women, this grasping for it after World War II, to get back to normal, to go back to the way women should be. Because during the Great Depression, women had to work. During World War II, women went into the workforce. There were more single parent households than ever before as in the Great Depression, because husbands abandoned their families because of didn't have jobs, or in World War II because husbands went away to war, and it was a frantic desire to go back. My grandma, who grew up in the Depression in Omaha, Nebraska, and then in World War II, she got a job at the Martin Bomber Factory in Bellevue, Nebraska, and so she made B-26s, then B-24s, and then B-29s. And she went up to be a supervisor in spare parts, and just an amazing person. And in fact, one day, she was sitting there at the bomber factory, and she was on the wing of a B-29. And she was on the wing of a B-29. And these very important people came in. This is in January 1945. And they were Army officers, but they had taken off all their rank. And so this was, they knew top secret. This has happened before. The secret, during the war, there's a lot of secrets. And they came in and walked around, and they were told, don't talk to him, don't look at him. And there's a group of officers and then civilians walking through, and the guy was clearly in charge. He was an Army Air Force officer, but he didn't have rank on. He was standing at the plane that my grandma was standing on the wings. She just got done inspecting the engine. And he said, I want this plane. I want this plane. And she remembers that. It was such kind of one of those moments. And later on, she recognized him when he was shown to the newsreels in August of 1945. It was Colonel Paul Tibbets. He was the commander of the 509th Bomber Squadron, the plane and the planes that dropped the atomic bombs. And he flew the plane that he said he pointed at. That's the plane that my grandma just inspected the engines. It was the Enola Gay. And so, kind of one of those brushes with history. My grandma just inspected the engine of the Enola Gay. But on August 15th, VJ Day, the war was over, Japan had surrendered. And there was a huge celebration, you can imagine. They went out all night. My grandma and my grandpa came in to work and then slept all night. And they went to every single woman, and gave them a pink slip. Fired them all. Even women or even men who were lower in status than my grandma, they stayed on the job. My grandma got fired. And she regretted this. I mean, she was so proud of what she did in the war. And I should add, it's like one of my favorite stories when she would tell me all this. To my point of view, my grandma won the war. But my other grandpa fought in the war. My grandma won the war, though. But she also remembered she wanted to go home. This was the idea, we're going to go back to normal. She could raise my mom and soon my uncle. And it was to go back to this normal life where the husband's supposed to go off to work and the family stayed home. And women accepted this. It would be about 15 years after the war where women would look back and say, wait a second. Didn't we do this before? Didn't we work? Don't we deserve equality in society? But the cult of domesticity, to go back to the way it was before. And women went back. Even though 20% of women still worked, it was seen as odd. If women worked, there was something wrong with them, or they're looking for a husband. In fact, women went to college. Why did they go to college? To either learn how to become a good housewife, home economics was like the most important major for women, and find a husband. And once they got married, you're supposed to give them college because you have to go home and be a good mother. And you'll see some of the ads of this time where they push this idea that, oh, sure, women, or push this role that women can't handle the hard business of life. Oh, they're good at raising children, but they're too emotional and not smart enough. And look at some of these ads from the 1950s. So here's a ketchup bottle. You mean a woman can open it? And then I love this one for Chase Sanborn Coffee. If your husband ever finds out that you're not store testing for fresher coffee, and he's, I guess, beating his wife because they didn't use Chase Sanborn Coffee. And here's by the late 1950s, the Volkswagen, which was becoming kind of a thing for, it was really sold to either kind of They started calling them hipsters, or for women to drive these Volkswagens. And it said sooner or later your wife will drive home. And one of the reasons for owning a Volkswagen, because women will get into a wreck, women drivers, and that the Volkswagen is safe. By the way, the Volkswagens were not safe. The trunks in front. If they got hit in the front, it was like an accordion, just yeah. So we're going to jump the gun for the last thing for today, because this can only mean one. We're not going to do it. I'm not going to do. We're going to stop right there. I went too long. I always go too long. I'm going to put some more samples up. Oh, let me show you one thing I'm going to put up then. So I'm going to put this up here, and it'll be a review sheet. A review sheet for, and I'm just editing right now, for the DBQ, and it's going to have things that are after the DBQ, the thesis, context, 4 documents, 2 pieces of evidence, a few things to write on, just something you can have when you want to quick print it out, you can have when you write the essay. And then down below, I have all the periods and main concepts. Now, I know you already have this on your review list, but I was just thinking, something you can just quick check, just to remind you of something, all the different points of context in this era. Because remember, context you needed, that's a point. That's 1 point, 1 out of 7. You need to have background information. All right. So on that happy note, I want to quit. And Monday, 10:30 review. If you want to redo part of your body paragraph and context paragraph for your DBQ, I'll give you credit. I would like it by Monday. I'll give you till Tuesday too. But please have it in Monday or Tuesday. Oh, I almost forgot. Extra credit. If you get that review packet done by Wednesday, or Tuesday, and you turn it in, I will give you extra credit. I want it done. And so you get it done, I will give you extra credit if you get the review packet by Tuesday. If you get them both done, I'll give you more extra credit. Not a huge amount, but I will give you extra credit. And the big thing about that one is, if you don't have it done by Thursday, you're in trouble for the DBQ. You'll be in trouble, because you're not going to be quite prepared. And there's something about not being prepared. If you're not prepared, your stress level goes up. You're not as confident. Please look at the sheets I give you. Please look at the webpage for sample DBQs and thesis statements. And on that happy note, please have a good weekend. Please quit raining. I was supposed to mow my yard tomorrow or this afternoon. Might not happen today. All right.